Hello fellas, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm gonna cover the entire story of solo leveling in just 20 minutes. This series literally has 200 chapters in Manhwa. So please understand that I might not be able to explain every event in detail. Instead, I shall outline to you every significant event in solo leveling. And with no further intro, let's dive right into the story. So now we have our protagonist, who? Sung Jinwoo. And what does he do? He hunts monsters. And where are these monsters? They are in dungeons. And where do these dungeons come from? Well, we'll get to that part later. Anyways, the story starts with showcasing Jinwoo as an E-rank hunter, the weakest hunter of mankind. Now hunters are divided into categories based on their strength and abilities that are bestowed on them permanently. These include ranks like E, D, C, B, A, S, and national rank hunters. Logically, a hunter's rank shouldn't increase, but sometimes they might undergo reawakening, thus increasing their ranks. Now, why do hunters hunt monsters inside dungeons? Well, it's basically for two things. Number one, to earn some cash along with glory, fame, and authority. And number two, if the monsters inside the dungeons are not killed and the dungeon remains uncleared, then after a certain amount of time, the monsters from the dungeons shall pour out on the world, thus causing destruction and deaths of civilians. Moving on to the story, our boy Jinwoo enters a low-ranked dungeon along with a few hunters to kill some monsters and earn some cash in order to treat his bed-sick mom and pay for his sister's tuition fees. But being the weakest hunter, right after killing a monster, he gets stabbed by another. His friend Juhi seals him, and in the meantime, the raid team discovers that there is a double dungeon inside the dungeon. In greed of earning some extra cash, they enter the double dungeon and meet their nemesis. Jinwoo quickly deciphers the 3 commandments and requests the remaining survivors to follow him. But at the end, they leave him behind, and Jinwoo sacrifices himself for their survival. At the brink of death, Jinwoo sees a system window appear asking him to be a player. He subconsciously accepts the offer, and the next thing we know, he finds himself on a hospital bed. Just then, 2 hunters from the Awaken Us Association approach Jinwoo to determine if he has undergone reawakening. But their detectors still showed him to be he rank. They leave, and Jinwoo finds himself staring at the system window that welcomes him as a player and asks him to perform some task. Jinwoo ignores it, and the time limit for the task expires. And as a punishment for failing to do the tasks, he is sent to another dimension where he is asked to survive for 4 hours from some horrifying monsters. Jinwoo anyhow survives it, and from next day onwards, he starts performing these tasks in the hospital, and a few days later, we see a ripped and muscular Jinwoo who has leveled up quite a bit. The system gives Jinwoo a key to a secret dungeon as a reward. Jinwoo enters the dungeon, kills a few monster wolves, gains a title, proceeds to the boss fight, defeats it, obtains the rewards, levels up, and dungeon cleared. Next, in order to earn some cash, he sets out for another dungeon raid, where he and a D-rank hunter, Jinho, join a team of 8 hunters to fill in their numbers for the raid party. But inside the dungeon, the 8 hunters betray Jinwoo and Jinho and trap them in the boss room. Jinwoo defeats the boss, and when those 8 players return to collect what's left of Jinwoo and Jinho, Jinwoo kills them all. But among those 8 people, one was the younger brother of S-rank hunter Hwang Dong-soo, and he now sets his target on Jinwoo to avenge his brother. After this, witnessing the powers of Jinwoo, Jinho asks him for his help in clearing dungeons so that Jinho can become a guild master. After that, we see Jinwoo going for another dungeon raid, along with the survivors of the double dungeon coincidentally. There are also 3 prisoners and a B-rank hunter overseeing the operation, but the B-rank hunter has actually been bribed to kill those 3 prisoners in the dungeon, which he of course does, but the other raid members catch him in the act, so to avoid repercussions, he decides to kill them all. But Jinwoo intervenes and kills the B-rank guy, thus leveling up to 40, and he gets a job change quest. So he goes to the dungeon provided by the system for his quest, and kills off various monsters, knights, mages, and finally faces off against the final boss, Igris. And he ruthlessly beats Jinwoo almost to the point of death. But anyways, Jinwoo kills Igris, and suddenly various portals open up, bringing in numerous amounts of monster enemies. Jinwoo keeps on fighting, but when he reaches his limits, he gets teleported to the penalty zone for not completing his daily tasks for the day. Jinwoo kills of the monsters in the dimension, restores his stamina, levels up a bit, and finally comes back for his rematch against the horde of monsters and defeats them all. Then he is granted the job of a necromancer, but due to his overpowered performance, he is granted a superior job of the Monarch of Shadow. and with his new ability, he acquires his first shadow, Igris. After this, Jinwoo visits his sister at school for PTM. There, the teacher asks Jinwoo to consult with a friend of Jinwoo's sister, who is aiming to be a hunter. The teacher is concerned that she, being a weak hunter, might not survive in the dungeons. Jinwoo meets her later, and to convince her to quit being a hunter, he asks her to follow him to a dungeon raid next day in order to show her the harsh reality of dungeons. They enter a C-rank dungeon with a few people from a top-ranked guild. The moment they enter the dungeon, it turns into a red dungeon. So a red dungeon is basically like a trap where the dungeon environment is set on a completely different dimension, and no forces from outside or inside the dungeon can either enter or exit it unless the boss has been killed. In the meantime, Hwang Dong-soo, whose brother had been killed by Jinwoo previously, he arrives at Korea in search of Jinwoo and sets out for the dungeon Jinwoo currently is in. Inside the red dungeon, the only A-ranked hunter gathers a group of strong individuals and sets out to clear the dungeon, leaving the rest of the Awiki team behind, including Jinwoo. But contrary to his expectations, he and his team gets killed by ice elves, while Jinwoo solo clears the dungeon, extracts the A-ranked hunter's shadow, naming him as Iron. In this dungeon, Jinwoo also gets a snow bear shadow summon named Tank. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, Hwang Dong-soo, on finding the red gate, believes that Jinwoo, being an E-ranked hunter, would surely die there, so he leaves the area. After this event, System gives Jinwoo another key. This time, it's for the S-ranked dungeon, a demon castle. In this dungeon, there are numerous floors, and Jinwoo has to climb them all, clearing each floor, and with each clearance, he shall be receiving level ups and rewards. Jinwoo keeps going on with his conquest for the demon castle, and when he acquires 2 out of the 3 materials needed to gain the Holy Water of Life, he exists out of the dungeon. Holy Water of Life is a miraculous elixir that can cure his mother's sickness. So Jinwoo was determined on clearing the dungeon, but due to his schedule, he had to leave for the Awakeners Association to get himself re-evaluated. During his evaluation, the machine breaks down, confirming his status as a possible S-ranked hunter, and his final evaluation is rescheduled for later. In the meantime, Jinwoo enters an A-ranked dungeon disguising himself as a porter. But this dungeon raid also gets abnormal, since the monsters seem to have powered up quite a bit under the leadership of the orc shaman. The raid party almost gets killed, but then Jinwoo intervenes and solos the dungeon with his shadow army, thereby killing the orc shaman and making him his new summon, Tusk. After this, Jinwoo re-enters the demon castle, where he kills numerous demons and meets with the demon princess, who literally goes bonkers on Jinwoo. Then, after a mutual negotiation, Jinwoo faces off Demon King Baron at the final floor. By now, he is level 90. So after a long fight, he kills the Demon King and acquires his 5th major Shadow Kaiser. Also, he receives the Holy Water of Life as the final reward, which he uses to cure his mother. In the meantime, Korea and Japan Awakeners hold a meeting to decide for the Jeju Island raid. Jeju Island has had an uncleared dungeon for a long time. The dungeon had been swarming with ants, but as of now, the ants have mutated and can fly. So before they fly to any other places and harm civilians, they decided to close the chapter on the dungeon at once. Jinwoo decides not to go on the raid. Japan's S-rank hunters decide to stay outside the dungeon to clear any monsters swarming out of the dungeon, while Korea's S-ranked hunters shall clear the dungeon. At first glance, Japan's motive comes off as a helpful support for the raid. But in reality, they were aiming for the deaths of Korea's all S-ranked hunters participating in the raid, which would give them the opportunity to clear the dungeon and gain glory, as well as deal a massive blow to their competitor nation. But contrary to everyone's expectations, Ant King kills off all the S-ranked hunters of Japan, and proceeds to do so for the Korean hunters as well. But in that moment, Jinwoo enters the scene using his Shadow Exchange ability, and kills the Ant King, raising him as one of his most powerful shadows ever. The entire raid had been live broadcasted to the world, who witnessed the formidable powers of Sung Jinwoo. After this event, America tries to recruit Jinwoo, offering him lots of benefits, but he declines. Next, Jinwoo creates his own guild Aljin, with only 3 members: Ginwoo, Ginho and Jinho's cousin, Soo-hyun. After owning a guild, Jinwoo now had the rights to enter a dungeon alone, so he sets off for a dungeon raid with his shadows and clears it. Upon clearing it, he gets a key to the secret double dungeon, the same dungeon that made him a player. Well then, Jinwoo sets off for the double dungeon, hoping to find the answers to his questions. There he meets the architect, who is the creator of the system. The architect attacks Jinwoo and throws him into a deep slumber, thereby revealing his intentions. The architect declares Jinwoo as a vessel for the Shadow Monarch Ashbourne. And the architect created the system for Jinwoo's body to grow strong enough to hold the possession of Ashbourne. However, contrary to his plans, Ashbourne rejects Jinwoo's body and instead gives Jinwoo some of his powers. That helps Jinwoo overpower the architect and attain victory. Moving on, an S-ranked gate appears in Japan, and since Japan has lost all its S-ranked hunters in the Jeju Island raid, they are unable to defend against it. So they commission a Russian S-ranked hunter, Yuri, to clear the gate. Yuri demands a huge payment for his services, but gets insta-killed right off the bat. So Jinwoo arrives at the scene and defeats numerous giant armies with his shadows and raises the giant monsters as his own shadow summons. Next he enters the dungeon and finds the monarch of beginning, who had been trapped and sealed inside it. The giant monarch tries to outplay Jinwoo but gets killed by him instead. Next, there is a global summit of all hunters around the world hosted in America. Thomas Andre, the world's strongest national rank hunter, warns Wang Dongsu, who works under Thomas in his guild, to not mess with Jinwoo at any cost and forget his revenge. But despite the warning, Dongsu kidnaps Jinwoo's aide Jinho and tortures him. After locating Jinho, Jinwoo arrives at the scene and brutally beats up Hwang Dongsu, kills him, and extracts his shadow, naming him as agreed. Enraged at this event, Thomas Andre wages a fight against Jinwoo for his fellow guild comrade, but Jinwoo and his shadow soldiers literally break the shit out of Thomas and his guild. Later on in the summit, everyone is afraid and mesmerized by Jinwoo upon hearing the fight between Jinwoo and Thomas. During the summit, it is revealed that 2 national rank hunters had been assassinated, and the most likely culprit seems to be someone claiming to be Jinwoo's dad. Jinwoo outright declares war against any nation or being that would allege his dad without proof. While everyone suspected Jinwoo's dad to be the murderer, it was actually the monarchs that killed those national ranked hunters. In Korea, the Frost Monarch sneaks into the office of the chairman of the Hunters Association and kills him. Jinwoo arrives a tad late and was unable to save him. In his final moments, the chairman asks Jinwoo to please remain on the side of humanity. So, Jinwoo then invests some time with his family and later sets out on a date with his new S-ranked girlfriend, Cha Hyein. Their date ends and 9 new S-ranked gates appear all over the world, out of which 3 monarchs, Beast Monarch, Monarch of Frost, and Plague Monarch, appear in Korea to kill Jinwoo. In a tough battle, Jinwoo kills Plague Monarch but gets killed by the Beast and Frost Monarch. And ladies and gentlemen, Jinwoo dies. And now comes the twist. A screen appears, stating that Jinwoo's passive skill, Black Heart, is activated. Now Jinwoo finds himself in the past, in the same hospital bed, right after the double dungeon incident. But this time, Jinwoo has all his shadows with him, as well as his level is 146, right from the start. So, in this timeline, Jinwoo saves as many lives as possible, but the notification "Would you like to restart the world?" keeps popping up in front of him. And even upon choosing a no, the notifications don't stop, and finally the Monarch of Shadows, Ashbourne, appears in front of Jinwoo and tells the story of the world of solo leveling, the history of monarchs, rulers, and the absolute being the world is unbeknownst to. In the beginning of the universe, there was only one divine being, the absolute being. Now he was alone, with no subordinates or people by his side. So he decided to create 2 forms of beings, monarchs and rulers. Monarchs were designed to bring destruction to the universe, while rulers were designed to defend it against the monarchs. As a result, there existed a long-term fight between the 2 factions. To end the war once and for all, the rulers requested the absolute being to lend them some of his powers. But the absolute being ignored their plea. The rulers then realized that their eternity-long war was nothing more than a source of entertainment for the absolute being. So they betrayed the absolute being and killed him and started using his powers to overpower the monarchs. But the absolute being was already aware of the ruler's betrayal, so he had shared some of his formidable powers with his most loyal ruler, who didn't take part in the betrayal. That is Ashbourne. The power that Ashbourne gained was the power over the dead that enabled him to create unlimited amounts of shadow soldiers from corpses. Ashbourne, upon his failure to protect the absolute being, joins the monarchs to enact revenge on the rulers. Thus he establishes himself as the Shadow Monarch. Now, upon seeing the overwhelming power of Ashbourne, a few monarchs betray him. Ashbourne kills some of them, while others flee. Rulers arrive at the scene and beg for forgiveness from Ashbourne. Ashbourne becomes conflicted on what he should do. At first, the rulers betrayed him, Then monarchs betrayed him. Now, most of his shadow army is gone because of the war, so Ashbourne decides to take a chill pill for a while. But he decides that he shall destroy the monarchs, for sure. After recovering himself, Ashbourne finds out that the rulers have almost beaten the monarchs, and even imprisoned some of them, like the monarch of beginning. Now the war had shifted to Earth since the remaining monarchs decided to invade Earth. As a result of the battle between monarchs and rulers, Earth gets destroyed with literally 0 survivors. So to not repeat this mistake, the rulers use an item called the Cup of Reincarnation, which basically rewinds time to 10 years in the past. Now again the war occurs, and Earth gets destroyed, and the rules use the Cup of Reincarnation to rewind time, and they repeat this process over and over. But the Cup of Reincarnation has a certain number of usable limits. So, the rulers decide to create dungeons on Earth to familiarize humanity with the concept of mana, so that at least some of them can survive the war. Also, the rulers selected a few individuals as their vessels and planted the fragment of light inside them, basically turning them into S-ranked or national ranked hunters. All the hunters killed by the monarchs, as discussed previously, they were all vessels of rulers, containing the fragment of light inside them. Now while chasing the monarchs, Ashbourne arrives on Earth, but he isn't able to find a vessel for himself since his powers are too strong to be contained within an individual. At this point, the architect enters with a proposal for finding a suitable vessel for Ashbourne in exchange for immortality. And that vessel is none other than a Sung Jinwoo. After spilling all the secrets, Ashbourne then asks Jinwoo if he wants to stay inside this world that he has created where he saved so many lives, or does he want to go back to the real world? To answer this, Jinwoo says, "Arise," and he literally resurrects himself back in the real world along with all of Ashbourne's powers. When he opens his eyes, he watches his father defending him against the attacks of Beast and Frost monarchs. Jinwoo chases after the Frost and Beast monarch and kills them leisurely. Finally, Jinwoo meets his missing dad, but sadly due to his injuries in this fight, Jinwoo's dad passes away. Jinwoo gets to know from his dad that when he had been trapped inside a dungeon, he was approached by the rulers, who turned him into their vessel, planting in him the brightest fragment of light, and tasked him to kill as many monarchs or their minions as possible in order to save Earth and his family. Jinwoo resented, but also missed his dad for leaving his family behind. This is one of the most bittersweet moments in the series. Anyways, moving on, a huge gate opens in Korea, and finally the 10 million shadow army of the previous shadow monarch, Ashbourne, led by Grand Marshal Bellion, greet their new master, the current shadow monarch, Sung Jinwoo. The world gets mesmerized seeing dragons, giants, rulers, and numerous mythical creatures among Jinwoo's army. This finally makes Jinwoo creditable of the title of world's strongest hunter. Now the final war. Jinwoo prepares the world for the final war between the monarchs and himself and was waiting in Korea for the monarchs. But the monarchs open a gate in Canada and destroy the country. Jinwoo arrives at the massacre, chasing the monarchs and killing them on sight. He also had lent Bellion and some of his soldiers to Thomas Andre, who is also a vessel for the rulers, and they face off against the monarch of Iron Body and kill him. Jinwoo finally faces Antare, the monarch of destruction, who is also a dragon himself. Jinwoo warps Antares to a different dimension, where he along with the rulers successfully kill Antares. The war is finally over, but Jinwoo requests the rulers to use the Cup of Reincarnation one last time, but this time, they don't have to open any gates or dungeons, they just gotta turn back time so that Jinwoo, who is now the Shadow Monarch, can retain his powers 10 years in the past and end the war in a new timeline with 0 casualty. The rulers agreed to this proposition and used the Cup of Reincarnation. Jinwoo opens his eyes and sees his father in front of him. He gets a bit emotional, but then gets a hold of himself and sets out to do what he needed to. For the next 27 years, Jinwoo cuts off all ties from his family and battles the monarchs in the dimensional crack, thereby killing them all. After this, rulers ask Jinwoo if he wants to live in this world or move on to another. Since there is no mana in this world, Jinwoo outright declines the offer and goes back to his world that has his friend and families alive and living happily. In the end, Jinwoo meets Cha Hyein. And that's how the story of solo leveling comes to an end. Well, I genuinely hope that you enjoyed watching the video. Do like and share the video, subscribe the channel, and comment your opinions down below. I shall be bringing more cool and fulfilling anime buzzing content for you. So stay tuned and check out our other videos. Sayonara.